G'day, watch this.
I'll now introduce our second speaker, who's Senator Bill Heffernan. And Bill, of course, has also spoken extensively on this issue, but he's also grown up in rural areas. He was schooled in Sydney, but he grew up in the riverina town of Junee and returned to work on his family property and became a successful and diversified farmer. So he's certainly qualified to speak in this area. He also chaired the parliamentary committee into this area, so no doubt he'll share a little insight into those areas. Make welcome Bill, please.
Ooh, that was my hip. Thanks very much for the introduction, and my congratulations to the convener of these meetings, and thank you, David, for hosting it. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming, because the reason you're here, I presume, is because you want to keep Australia the best place in the world to raise a family, breathe fresh air and drink clean water. Could you all applaud that? That's not a bad idea. And yeah, no, but it's bigger than wine. That was a long advertorial part of that presentation. But thank you very much. And I mean, the points made about the hunter are certainly important, but I'm going to sort of go on a fairly wide journey here, and it's going to be full of facts rather than fantasy. And so I'm going to range into everything from foreign investment to coal seam gas and tell you a couple of stories. To put all this into context, I mean, Martin Ferguson said to me a while ago, he said, Bill, the one thing you must understand about the coal seam gas, and I was chairing the inquiry, an inquiry, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, which is available on the net, the report, an inquiry which the members of the government, that is the federal Labor government, signed up to, much to the anguish of the government. And the reason they signed up to it, the committee that I chair, we deal with the facts. And we don't play politics with people's livelihoods, and whether we're in government or the other mob are in government, my committee gives everyone buggery if we think they're entitled to be given a bit of a hiding. And they certainly is the case with coal seam gas. So Martin Ferguson said to me, Bill, the one thing you've got to understand about the federal government's position on this is we don't want to own the problem. That was their position. Let the states own the problem. And of course the states don't own the problem, and of course the average politician wants to get past tomorrow morning's headlines and the next election. But what I want to talk to you about is where we're going to be in 50 years' time and 70 years' time. You know. In 50 years' time, barring a human catastrophe, there'll be probably about 9 billion people on the planet. 50% of the people on the planet will be poor for water. This is according to science. All science has vagary, so a percentage of it could be right, a percentage could be wrong, but we've at least got to have a plan to understand, well, if it's 50% right, this is where we are. And of course, all human endeavour has failure. So by 2050, 9 billion people on the planet, 50% of the world's population poor for water, 1 billion people approximately, not much different to today, unable to feed themselves out of 9. 30% of the productive land of Asia is estimated will have gone out of production. 2/3 of the world's population are going to live in the same area where we're going to lose 30% of the productive capacity. The food task, some experts say 70%, some say 100% will have doubled. And guess what? If you think the boat problem is a problem, there'll be 1.6 billion people on the planet could be displaced, looking for somewhere else to live. So that's a snapshot out to 50 years. Out to 70 years with 12 billion people on the planet, barring a human catastrophe. A place like China, which will have just on 2 billion people, they're slowing down and getting this huge age demography. They've got a serious social problem in shifting 65% of their population to urban areas from agricultural areas. And they've got a huge problem with contamination of what we call suburban farming, where the urban sprawl is occurring. And so this is going to take a little while, but I'm going to deal with the facts. You might as well get the opportunity to get it into you. So they know that they have to produce from someone else's resource, half their population's tucker by 2070. And they are, to their credit, going about that in a very aggressive way around the planet as we sit here today. So the global food task by 2070 is going to be far more important than the global energy task. And the proposition that you see now, for all sorts of reasons, the United States saying, well, we're going to produce fuel out of food, that's not sustainable. The globe spends about 40 billion a year on agricultural research. We should be spending at least double that, 80 billion, because we've got to produce more with less of everything, water, fertiliser, etc. We spend about 1.6 or 7 trillion on defence, but we only spend 40 billion on tucker research. I mean, where's our priorities? To give you an idea of human displacement, there's a thing called the Great Northern Plain in China. Presently 260 million people live on the Great Northern Plain, and they have irretrievably mined the water in that plain. And so regardless of climate change or the science or any other bullshit that anyone wants to throw up, and pardon my language, they're going to have to move those people in about 15 or 20 years if they don't find a water solution. Now, they are trying to their credit, trying to find a water solution. One of the water solutions is moving water south from the Mekong by pipeline, and one of them, of course, is to hang on to Tibet, because Tibet's a good source of water. They don't talk about it, but that's really what they're conscious of Tibet for. One of the things they're doing, and they say you can do anything if you've got enough money and the right engineers, is to move water in a pipeline. They're building a pipeline that's 1,200 kilometres long. It consists of 27 pipes laid side by side, 4.5 metres deep, to shift water 1,200 kilometres. That's how big the problem is in China. In the central part of the southern continent of Africa, across the middle, there's a piece of country there which you'll read about the various communities over there that are starving and it's turning into desert. There's about 260 million people there that'll have to move. I was pleased to read in the paper today, Mr. Chairman, that the Queensland government is going to repeal the Wild Rivers Act on Cape York Peninsula. Australians, and that's why I congratulate you for being here today. Everyone in Sydney should be here today, because they all take it for bloody granted that you go to Coles and Woolies and Aldi's and the tuckers down there, the wine's down that lane there and the meat's down that lane, etc., etc. And that's not going to be necessarily the way it will be. To give you an idea of how slack we are, and it took me 4 years to talk the former government, John Howard's government, into the Northern Development Task Force, because Australia has one of the last sustainably able to be produced agricultural frontiers. It's not producing now. It could be sustainably done. And when we lost government, the present government got all the can-do people off it and put in no can-do people. So there you go. And a person like Lachlan Murdoch, when I rang him to ask him whether he'd go on the Northern Development Task Force, because I put the people on it, you know, in a flash, he said to me, Bill, I can't think of a more important thing I could do for Australia. I thought that was a fantastic answer. When the new government came in and they filled it up with bureaucrats and bloody academics and all these people that could think of reasons why he couldn't do things, he simply resigned. Cape York Peninsula, ladies and gentlemen, is 17.5 million hectares. This is just putting, before I get to coal seam gas, the challenge that we've got with what we've got to produce the food we've got to produce. It's the same size as Victoria. If you take out Cairns, Cooktown, Port Douglas, Bamaga and a few coastal towns, there are 14,000 people that live in an area the size of Victoria. 12,000 of them are Indigenous. There are an estimated 800,000 feral pigs. The average annual wildfire in Cape York Peninsula out of 7.5 million is 5 million hectares. The biggest wildfire they've had is 11 million hectares. There are 14 pastoral stations, and the rest of it is either national park or, and don't be offended by this because my Indigenous mates know I call them blackfellas and they call me a white fella, and they're all mates of mine. And don't get me on the Indigenous problem. There are still 8,500 kids in the Northern Territory who haven't got a high school to go to. They say to me, we would like a commercial opportunity in Cape York Peninsula. And what did we do? I chaired the Traveston Dam inquiry, which was a shit of a site for a dam, I might say. Peter Beattie, who I've got to know, honest enough to say to me, and they were good enough to have the bureaucrats come along to the Traveston Dam inquiry so I could slay them on the terrible site it was. He said to me, Bill, we had to win that particular election, which was three elections ago now. So we did a deal with the Wilderness Society to lock up Cape York Peninsula. So they've locked up for all agricultural commercial production the first kilometre from all those rivers all the way up. So I had a hearing in Cairns of the Northern Development Task Force, and I brought in Michael Ross, who was the chairman of the Cape York Peninsula, an Indigenous bloke. And I said, oh, Michael, what do you do? He said, oh, I live on, he named the property. It used to be a pastoral station, just up the coast from Cairns. I said, how big is it? He said, I don't know. He said, but it's 80 kilometres from the mailbox to the homestead. I said, what's the homestead like? He said, the white ants are eating it. I said, what are the fences like? He said, they're all fallen down. I said, well, what do you do? He said, my sons and I, we go out and catch feral cattle and sell them. I mean, that's the productive capacity up there. These guys want to own their own home and leave the home in their will to their kids, so they've got an incentive in life. Under the present arrangements, they can't. So, what we've said to the people of the world is we're going to turn that into a World Heritage Area. And the opportunity for the Indigenous people, for the blackfellas, is to have their photo taken with a spear on a rock for a tourist. I mean, that's what we've come down to. It's a bloody disgrace. To put that into context, part of the human displacement on the planet is going to be Bangladesh. Bangladesh is half the size of Cape York Peninsula. It has 160 million people that live in an area half the size of Cape York Peninsula. It has 57 rivers that flow into Bangladesh, 54 of them out of India. India is still in denial, unlike China, about the future and feeding itself. If the sea rises, and I'm not saying the sea's going to rise, but you've got to have a bloody plan. If the sea rises about 3/4 of what the estimate is that it could rise, they're going to lose all where they live now. India is going to absolutely take all their fresh water. They're going to have to move. As I've said many times, this is happening. I mean, 160 million people in an area half the size of Cape York Peninsula, and we say we can afford to lock up Cape York Peninsula for a good look and a good feeling. Bullshit. Bullshit. So these people, and if you think the boat people, all of these people on the boats are driven by absolute fear of where they've come from, and of course it's a $1 billion illegal trade. So they've had to turn to an elite, like bloody drug running. It's the same thing. The people that run it are in it for the money. And I'll get to customs and AQUIS in due course. Don't ask me how you can bring 34 containers of dirt from China into Australia as fertiliser and get it through customs and AQUIS and end up at Condobolin before they discover it. You know, that doesn't say much for AQUIS and customs. So, I say that we've got to develop Northern Australia, because if we don't, someone else will. When I said that in 2005, they put a headline, which they do, I'm used to nasty headlines, over the top of it saying Heffernan Asian invasion. Well, guess what? It's here. And the UN are not going to control this. The UN are the largest. I actually sat next to Robert Hill with the UN executive and told them this in the United Nations. I said, I'm so happy to be here to meet all you guys, the executive of the UN, to meet the largest, most corrupt bureaucracy on the planet. And poor old Robert Hill absolutely shrunk. But it's absolutely true. The majority of people in the UN are either autocracies, oligarchies, bloody, very few democracies. I mean they're all, their own, bit like Syria, disgrace. So, live the lifestyle, send your kids to Oxford and then go home and murder everyone. So that's what we're doing now. That's our thinking. I have to say this is pretty scary. There are lots of opportunities to develop Northern Australia, and we should take them. We should say to the next generation of farmers, the Murray-Darling Basin is 6.2% of Australia's runoff, 23,400 gigs. The science, and I know people will, I'm not interested in whether the science is right or wrong, but this is what it's saying, that by 2050, we will have a 2 degrees increase in temperature. I've got no idea if that's true or false. A 15% decline in runoff and a 25% decline, 25 to 30%, 15% decline in rainfall, 30% decline in runoff. The Murray-Darling Basin, for those who don't know, 38% of the runoff comes from just 2% of the landscape in the snowy mountains in northeast Victoria. To give you an idea of, we don't take any notice of this, but I'm a cocky, we do. Not this year and not last year, but the 3 years before that were bloody dry. And the snow prediction, by the way, for 2050 is 9 days. But the 3 years that I just spoke about, not this year, not the year before, but the 3 years before that, guess what? There was no snow melt. It all evaporated. There was so little snow, it evaporated. And we got down, and people generally don't know this, to a contingency plan in the dying days of Howard's government to get water to Adelaide by bringing it round through the Murrumbidgee, because the Murray went within a whisker of failing. So these are pretty scary things. And I have to say, as I've said many times, by 2050, what's in your fridge is going to be far more important than what's in your garage. So that's the challenge we face, and we're too bloody tired. We've said after World War II, we had a soldier-settler arrangement where we got young blokes coming home from the war and put them on farms. Most of that worked. Some of them were unviable, too smaller areas. I can't see why we don't have enough guts, gumption and thoughtfulness for the future to say to all these people in the Murray-Darling who are the next best thing to slitting their bloody wrists mentally because of the declining runoff and the water we've got to take away from them to maintain water for the fish so they don't have to grow legs. Because it was absolutely over-allocated the rivers, and we did that by separating land from water and making water tradable, and also making supplementary water, which is floodwater tradable. I can't see why we can't have enough brains to say, well, let's get the next generation of farmers an opportunity in the north. So Ord Stage 2, Ord Stage 1 is 14,000 hectares. There's 80,000 hectares of potential in the Ord, and an unlimited amount of water to do it with. There's an opportunity at the conjunction of the Fitzroy River and the Margaret River, the northern Margaret, not the Wine Margaret, which is just as good as the Ord. The Ord's not been developed because we've been too bloody lazy. And the people they put on the Northern Development Task Force came back to me, I told them to shove it. They said, oh, Bill, it's too far away from the market and it's too hot to develop the north. And I said, give me a break. Where's the best place to be on a bloody hot day? In the cab of the tractor. The air conditioning's better than the house. Why is it too far away from the market? Because you're looking the wrong way, you dill. 2/3 of the world's population's turnaround is just over the water, closer to us than Sydney is from up there. 2/3, this is Asia. I mean, how brain dead are these people? If you go 400 kilometres southwest from, we did all this on the task force, from Cairns, you'll come to a place called Georgetown on the Gilbert River. It was pegged out in 1957 as an irrigation area, and it's never been developed because we didn't see any need to. There was no political imperative. There's only one local member, you know. No political thought for the future at all. So we've got to actually think about, to put today into context about what the challenge is ahead, and that's what I'm attempting to do now, but I better sort of start to sharpen up a bit or you'll hunt me. I must tell you one other thing though, because I'm going to see your minister after lunch about this, Mr. Clark. To give you an idea how brain dead people can be, and they're advised by bureaucrats in a brief, we've got a proposition at the present time to buy water back. There's 2,750 gigs got to be bought back for the river system out of 23,400 that runs off, to buy the water in the lower Murrumbidgee floodplain. It will be a huge fraud on the public purse. These guys, and good luck to them if they get away with it, they're going to win lotto. A couple of bankers have moved in there and bought a place and put some ideas in their head. So these cockies are like me, they get old, worn out and cranky. So they want to get out. So they put a proposition to the state government as part of the buyback obligation of New South Wales to buy back the water off the floodplain, the lower Bidgie floodplain, which comes out of a weir at a place called Maud. And under what is proposed by the government, state government, fortunately I've already got to Berkey to alert him, is they want to buy that. These people don't have a licence for this water. They've been using it for 30 years unlicensed. It's unlicensed, unregulated, unmetered and free water. It's flood water. When the river gets to a certain height, it goes down the floodplain. Good luck to them. Torrey Plains was one of the places, I know it well. They decided to clear the lignum off the floodplain, level it up, and when the flood goes over, they put a crop in and get a crop. You know, in a 12-inch rainfall area. It's a pretty good idea. They've said to the government, we'll sell you all the water that goes over the floodplain, and we'll sell you all the channels and infrastructure separately, and then we'll sell you the land separate to that. And I rang up David Harris, who's the head of the water setup in New South Wales. What the bloody hell's this all about? He told me. I said, that is complete bullshit. What they're proposing to do is cooking the books for the buyback. And that is to buy water that naturally flows over a floodplain to return it to the environment. It's already in the environment. These blokes don't have a licence, so they're going to issue these characters a water licence based on an estimate. It's not metered, it's unmetered, unregulated, unlicensed, and it's free water up until this point. They're going to issue a licence to these characters for this water, and in the agreement they're going to pay them 2.25 times the market value of the water after they issue the licence to them free to buy the water back, then to be able to send it back to the environment. Then they want to buy all the channels, etc., because they want to shepherd some of it through, and they want to buy the land. Has anyone ever heard of someone buying a farm, Mr. Tyrrell, and you buy the windmills and the fences and the gates separate to the farm? I mean, this is what's on. This is what's on. I'm going to see her at 3 o'clock. So that's how stupid bureaucracies can become.